Good evening, America. I'm Rachel Maddow, and tonight we begin with breaking news from the Chechen Republic, news that represents one of the most stunning developments of this war. A Ukrainian precision strike has hit deep inside Russian territory, far from the front lines, targeting what Moscow believed was an untouchable stronghold. This strike did more than damage buildings. It sent shockwaves through Russia's military command structure and reportedly triggered a frantic emergency phone call from Ramzan Kadyrov directly to Vladimir Putin. Ukrainian forces destroyed a facility in Chechnya that housed elite fighters, sensitive command infrastructure, and weapons stockpiles Russia assumed were safely out of reach. The significance of this cannot be overstated. Ukraine did not simply hit a distant target. They struck at the heart of one of Putin's most loyal allies, a region tightly controlled by a leader who rules with absolute authority. Russian planners had repeatedly assured leadership that this area was entirely secure, protected by distance, air defenses, and political assumptions. Yet, Ukrainian capabilities proved otherwise, demonstrating reach and precision that reshape the strategic map of this conflict. This is not merely another example of advanced long-range strikes. It is a direct challenge to the protected status that Kadyrov and his forces have enjoyed throughout this war. The facility served multiple critical functions: a training center for Chechen fighters before deployment to Ukraine, an ammunition depot supporting operations across the southern front, and a command node linking Chechen forces with Russian military headquarters. It symbolized Kadyrov's authority and the perception that his region stood beyond the practical and political limits of Ukrainian military action. That perception was destroyed in a single operation. Ukrainian strikes hit with accuracy that stunned Russian commanders, overcoming defenses they believed were sufficient and creating undeniable damage visible to nearby residents. Secondary explosions from ammunition stored inside expanded the destruction and exposed vulnerabilities Russia believed distance alone would protect. Even more significant was the loss of personnel considered loyal members of Kadyrov's elite units. These casualties impose a direct political cost, forcing him to explain how fighters supposedly stationed in secure territory became victims of a Ukrainian strike. For someone who builds his authority on strength and protection, this is a profound blow. What makes this operation extraordinary is the intelligence behind it. Ukraine did not fire blindly. They selected a precise facility, determined when it held maximum strategic value, analyzed its defenses, and executed a timing plan that indicates detailed, high-confidence intelligence. Such targeting requires networks that penetrate Russian security, surveillance capable of tracking movements in closed regions, and planning that accounts for everything from weapon performance to predicted Russian responses. This level of insight raises serious questions within Russian security agencies about how deeply Ukrainian or Western intelligence has infiltrated their systems. If Ukraine can strike this far into Chechnya with such precision, then no location in Western Russia is truly secure. Command bases, logistics hubs, and ammunition depots once considered safely behind Russian lines now appear vulnerable. This shift has enormous psychological impact. Russian personnel stationed in rear areas must now accept they could become targets. Even more importantly, regional leaders supporting Putin's war effort must confront the reality that participation in this conflict carries risks to their territories and forces, risks they believed Moscow could prevent. According to multiple sources, Kadyrov's reaction was immediate and intense. Within hours, he placed an emergency call to Putin, described by insiders as heated and demanding. He pressed for explanations about how Ukrainian weapons penetrated so deeply into his controlled territory, and how air defenses failed to intercept the strike. He reportedly insisted on immediate retaliation and raised concerns about whether Chechnya can continue supporting the war if Russia cannot protect its own rear areas. This was not a routine coordination call. It was a direct challenge from one of Putin's most valuable allies. Putin has relied on Kadyrov for years. Chechen forces provide reliability, discipline, and willingness to conduct missions other Russian units avoid. Kadyrov's power and autonomy stem from this relationship. A Ukrainian strike that undermines his prestige and kills his fighters threatens that balance. He cannot simply ignore the implications. He must now explain to families, commanders, and security officials how Ukrainian intelligence obtained detailed information and why defenses failed. He must attempt to reassure them, despite lacking genuine guarantees, that similar strikes won't occur again. Putin's response reportedly tried to satisfy conflicting demands, reassure Kadyrov, maintain the alliance, project confidence, and downplay the severity of Ukraine's success. But none of these efforts fully addressed the core problem. Russia's air defenses and intelligence networks failed to protect a politically critical target. The call ended with promises, but sources say Kadyrov was left unsatisfied. The very existence of this urgent conversation and the widespread leaking of its contents signals how disruptive the strike has been for Russian leadership. Normally, regional leaders follow established command paths and accept official explanations. A direct, confrontational call indicates either an exceptional privilege Kadyrov holds or an emergency serious enough to override protocol. Either way, it exposes vulnerabilities in Russia's leadership cohesion, vulnerabilities Ukraine appears intent on exploiting. For comparison, cities like Lyman were important logistics hubs, but this Chechen facility represented something far more sensitive, a symbol of Russian depth, security, and political control. Ukrainian planners understood the strategic, political, and psychological value when selecting the target. They did not aim merely to destroy infrastructure. They aimed to force political consequences inside Russia. The facility coordinated Chechen forces arriving for deployment, rotating units off the front, storing ammunition, and directing operations. Disabling it disrupts an entire operational ecosystem. Delays in rotation, shortages of supplies, and reduced coordination weaken Chechen forces at the front, units on which Russia heavily depends. Politically, Kadyrov now faces pressure on all fronts, from families demanding answers, from commanders questioning security, from security officials evaluating intelligence failures, and from a population that expected immunity from the consequences of war. He must justify continued participation in a conflict that is now directly affecting Chechen territory. The losses of weapons and equipment worsen operational issues. Units may face shortages, postponed missions, or slower deployment cycles. Russian commanders who rely on Chechen fighters now must adjust to reduced capabilities and disrupted supply lines. The precision of the strike raises alarming concerns for Russian intelligence services. Ukraine clearly received detailed, timely information about the facility's functions, defenses, and peak activity periods. This suggests either infiltration of Russian structures or advanced Western surveillance. For counterintelligence agencies, this represents a comprehensive failure. They failed to detect intelligence collection, failed to protect sensitive information, and failed to anticipate a strike despite knowing Ukraine possessed long-range weaponry. This failure also strains relations between Chechen security agencies and Russian federal services. Chechnya maintains its own security structures that report directly to Kadyrov, often causing friction with Moscow. Now both sides blame each other. Federal agencies accuse Chechen forces of weak internal security. Chechen officials accuse Moscow of inadequate defenses. These fractures create opportunities for Ukraine to exploit divisions inside the Russian security apparatus. The intelligence preparation behind the strike likely took months. Signals intercepts, human sources, satellite imagery, activity tracking, defense mapping, and operational planning. Ukraine maintained strict security throughout the process. The strike succeeded against a target Russian security believed was shielded from such operations. This reflects a new phase of Ukrainian strategy, one that goes beyond frontline combat and focuses on deep strikes that create political instability within Russia. Ukraine's ability to create political consequences deep inside Russia reshakes the strategic environment. It signals a future where distance and political alliances no longer guarantee safety, and where the backbone of Putin's support network faces direct risks from Ukrainian action.